Ilara sat in her wheelchair, staring out of the lab window. The world outside seemed to move at a fast pace. People were walking, running, laughing, and living their lives freely. Ilara, however, was bound to a chair. She had been like this for over 10 years. Every day, she felt the weight of her limitations. Her legs no longer worked the way they once had. An accident when she was young had left her paralyzed from the waist down. At first, she tried to fight it. But over time, the reality of her condition set in. The world she once knew was no longer the same. She had to watch life pass her by. Ilara wasn't just any ordinary woman, though. She was a brilliant scientist, known for her sharp mind and her relentless drive for knowledge. Her hands, though unable to walk, were capable of creating wonders in her lab. The world of science was her escape, her comfort. It was a world where her mind could roam free, unbound by her physical limitations. Still, her heart ached every time she saw someone run, jump, or move with ease. She had once been able to do those things too. She could remember the feeling of the wind rushing through her hair, the excitement of a sprint, the joy of jumping high. But all of that was gone. Now she sat in the same chair, day after day, longing for a life she could never reach. But Ilara didn't give up hope. She had spent years researching medical technologies, hoping that one day someone would come up with something that could help her. She had seen stories of new advances in robotics, prosthetics, and neural implants, but nothing seemed promising enough. Everything seemed out of reach. That was until one day when everything changed. The discovery. Ilara was scrolling through her computer like she did every evening, searching for the latest breakthroughs in medical technology. Her fingers moved quickly over the keyboard, eyes focused on the screen. She came across a few articles about new prosthetic developments, but none of them stood out. That was until she saw a name, Leo Reyes. The title read, Human Engineer Developing Robotic Legs for Paralyzed Patients. The image on the screen was of a sleek, shiny prosthetic leg that looked almost too advanced to be real. Ilara's heart skipped a beat. Could this be the solution she had been searching for all these years? Leo Reyes was known in the scientific community as an engineer who specialized in robotics. But Ilara had never heard of him before. She clicked the link, eager to learn more. The page opened with a detailed description of Leo's work. He had created advanced robotic prosthetics that mimicked the natural movements of human legs. His project was still in its early stages, but he had already tested the technology on a few volunteers. The results were promising. Ilara leaned closer to the screen, reading carefully. The prosthetics were powered by a new type of neural connection that allowed the user to control the legs with their thoughts. It wasn't just an ordinary mechanical limb. It was designed to work with the body's nervous system, enabling it to function like a real leg. Could this be real? Could a paralyzed person like her actually walk again? Ilara felt a glimmer of hope, but it was quickly replaced by doubt. The technology sounded too good to be true. She had read about many failed projects over the years, many false promises. And this technology, if it worked, could change everything. But was she willing to risk it? Was she willing to trust someone she had never met before, someone who was developing a technology that had never been proven? She clicked on another link and found an interview with Leo Reyes himself. He spoke passionately about his work and how it could help people like Ilara. He was determined to push the boundaries of science and give people back the ability to walk. I believe this technology can change the lives of many, Leo said in the video, but it's still in its early stages. There are risks, and we don't know everything about how it will affect the human body, but the potential is immense. Ilara paused the video. Her heart was pounding in her chest. She had heard words like this before, words filled with hope and excitement. But there was always a catch, always a risk. And what if the risk was too great? What if the technology failed, or worse, harmed her? The decision. For the next few days, Ilara couldn't stop thinking about Leo's work. She read everything she could find about his project. But the more she read, the more questions she had. Could her body handle the technology? Would the neural connection work for her? Given her injury, she wasn't sure. But the possibility of walking again, of being free from the chair, kept tugging at her heart. She spent hours in her lab, running simulations on her computer, trying to find any information that could answer her questions. She spoke with her colleagues, other scientists in the field, asking for their opinions. Some were excited by the possibility, while others warned her that it was too risky. The technology was untested on people like her, and there were too many unknowns. But Ilara was tired of being stuck. She was tired of watching the world pass her by. She wanted more than just to exist. She wanted to live again, to walk, to run, to feel the earth beneath her feet. Late one night, after hours of research and contemplation, Elara made a decision. She would contact Leo. She would take the risk. She couldn't stay in this chair forever. If there was even a chance that she could walk again, she had to try. The next morning, Elara sent an email to Leo Reyes. She told him about her condition and how she had been following his work. She asked him if his technology could help someone like her. She hit send and waited. It wasn't long before she got a response. The email from Leo Reyes came much sooner than Elara had expected. She stared at the screen for a moment, her fingers frozen on the keyboard. Her heart raced with anticipation and fear. This could be the turning point in her life, the moment when everything changed. Or it could just be another dead end, another promise that would lead nowhere. Taking a deep breath, Elara clicked open the message. Subject: robotic legs for paralyzed patients. Hello, Elara. Thank you for reaching out. I'm glad to hear that you're interested in the work I'm doing. I believe my technology could help you, but it's still in the experimental phase. There are risks involved, and I need to be upfront about them. However, I have worked with other patients who were able to regain some mobility with the technology. If you're serious about moving forward, I'd be happy to discuss it further. We can set up a meeting. Best regards, Leo Reyes. Elara stared at the message, her mind racing. He was willing to meet. This was real. She can almost feel the excitement building within her. A chance to walk again. A chance to be free from the chair. She had to know more. But then again, Leo had warned her. This was still experimental. The risks were real, and the unknowns were many. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. Was she ready for this? Was she ready to take that leap of faith, knowing that it could either restore her life or bring even more pain? In the end, Elara knew she had no choice. She had to know. She had to try. She quickly typed out a reply. Subject: robotic legs for paralyzed patients. Hello, Leo. Thank you for your quick response. I am very interested in learning more about your work and the possibility of using your technology. I would like to meet and discuss the details further. Please let me know when would be a convenient time. Best regards, Elara. Once the email was sent, Elara sat back in her chair, staring at the screen as the reality of her decision began to settle in. She had just taken the first step towards something that could change everything. But would it be worth it? Would Leo's technology work for her? The meeting. A week later, Elara arrived at the location Leo had given her. It was a large, modern building in the heart of the city, a place that looked more like a high-tech laboratory than a typical office. She took a deep breath before pushing open the glass door. Inside, the lab was filled with machines, wires, and screens, all flashing with data. Scientists and engineers moved around the space, their focus intense as they worked on various projects. But one figure stood out among the rest: Leo Reyes. He was tall, with short, dark hair, and sharp eyes that seemed to analyze everything around him. He looked up when Elara entered, and a small smile appeared on his face. Elara, he said, his voice warm but professional. I'm glad you could make it. Thank you for meeting with me, Elara replied, trying to hide the nervousness in her voice. She had been excited to meet him, but now that she was here, she wasn't sure what to expect. Leo motioned for her to follow him as he led her through the lab. I've read a lot about your work, Elara. You're an expert in biomechanics, right? Elara nodded. Yes, I specialize in understanding how the body moves and how technology can interact with the human body. Good, Leo said with a smile. You'll appreciate the technology I'm working on then. They stopped in front of a large table, where a sleek, shiny pair of robotic legs lay under a white cloth. Elara's breath caught in her throat as she saw them. They looked like nothing she had ever seen before. Sleek, futuristic, and almost too perfect to be real. Leo pulled back the cloth, revealing the legs fully. They were made of lightweight, high-strength materials and were designed to look and function like real human limbs. The joints were smooth and flexible, and the design was streamlined, almost artistic. These are the latest prototype, Leo explained. They're designed to be controlled by your neural impulses, just like your legs would be. They're not perfect yet, but they're getting close. Elara reached out to touch one of the legs. The surface was smooth and cold to the touch, but there was an underlying power within it. It was incredible to think that something like this could restore her ability to walk. But as she traced her fingers over the leg, a thought crossed her mind. What if this didn't work? What if she couldn't connect with it the way Leo said she would? The risks were real. She could feel the weight of the uncertainty pressing down on her. Leo seemed to sense her hesitation. I know this is a big step, Alara, he said, his tone serious. But I believe this technology can help you. We've tested it on other patients, and the results have been promising. You'll need to trust the process. But I think you're capable of it. I think you deserve this chance. Alara swallowed hard, her mind a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts. She wanted this. She needed this. But the fear of failure was real. She had spent years living in a wheelchair. Could she handle the disappointment if this didn't work? But then, she thought of the future where she could walk again, where she could feel the earth beneath her feet. That was worth the risk, wasn't it? I'm ready, she said, her voice steady. Let's do this. Leo nodded, a look of determination crossing his face. All right, let's make it happen. The following days were a blur of preparations. Alara had been fitted with a neural interface that would connect her brain to the robotic legs. It wasn't a simple procedure, and she had to undergo a series of tests to make sure her body could handle the neural link. The team of engineers and doctors worked tirelessly, adjusting the settings, calibrating the interface, and testing every aspect of the technology. Leo was there every step of the way, his presence calming Ilara's nerves. Still, the uncertainty gnawed at her. Would it work? Would the robotic legs allow her to walk again? Or would this experiment end in failure? She tried to push those thoughts aside, focusing on the goal. Walking. It was the first time in over 10 years that she truly believed it might be possible. The day of the first trial arrived, and Alara's heart raced with a mix of excitement and fear. She stood in the center of the sterile lab, surrounded by monitors, wires, and machines. Leah was there, standing by her side, offering her a reassuring smile. Are you ready? He asked, his voice gentle but full of confidence. Alara nodded, her palms sweating. I think so. The team had spent hours getting the robotic legs ready. They were now strapped to her lower body, their sleek design fitting perfectly with her form. The weight of the legs was minimal, but they felt powerful, like they were waiting to come live. Leo placed a hand on her shoulder, his eyes locked on hers. Remember, Alara, the legs are controlled by your neural impulses. You don't have to force it. Just try to think about moving, and the legs will follow. Alara took a deep breath, steadying herself. She could hear the soft hum of the machines around her, the quiet beeping of the monitors. The world seemed to slow down as she focused on the task at hand. She had to let go of the fear, trust the technology, and trust her own body. Okay, Alara whispered to herself, I can do this. Leo gave a small nod and pressed a button on the console in front of him. Instantly, the neural connection activated, and Alara felt a strange sensation in her legs, a subtle warmth, followed by a light tingling feeling. It wasn't painful, but it was strange. Her mind struggled to comprehend the sensation, but she forced herself to relax, to focus on the task. The first step was the hardest. Alara's body was used to sitting in the chair, to the immobility that had defined her life for so long. Her muscles had forgotten what it felt like to move, to stand. But she closed her eyes, took another deep breath, and concentrated on her legs. She thought about standing up, about lifting herself from the chair. And slowly, with a slight tremor in her hands, Alara's body responded. The legs moved. Not much, but enough. She felt a shift, a small lift, as the robotic legs adjusted to her weight. For a moment, she was frozen, unsure of what to do next. But Leo's voice broke through the silence. Good, Alara. Now try to stand. You don't have to rush it. Just focus. Alara focused harder, her mind filled with images of standing, of walking. She willed the legs to move again. And this time, they did. One foot lifted from the ground, then the other. Her heart raced as she slowly, cautiously, stood upright. The sensation was surreal. The legs felt strange, but natural at the same time. It was as though she was moving through a dream, where her mind and body were still trying to catch up with each other. But she was standing, really standing, for the first time in over a decade. She looked down at her legs, wide-eyed, a feeling of disbelief washing over her. The robotic limbs were responding to her thoughts, moving with her as if they were a part of her own body. It was working. But then, something unexpected happened. Her body began to tremble. It wasn't a pain, but a feeling of weakness. like the muscles she hadn't used in years were waking up too quickly. The robotic legs adjusted automatically, but Ilara could feel the strain building in her lower body. She struggled to keep her balance, and the pressure in her legs intensified. Ilara, Leo's voice was sharp, filled with concern. Are you okay? I think so, Ilara said, her voice shaky. But my legs, they're not responding the way I thought they would. The engineers immediately began checking the monitors. One of the techs rushed to Leo's side, adjusting the settings on the neural interface. The system is overloading. The neural link is too strong. It's trying to force her muscles to move too quickly. Ilara felt a wave of panic wash over her. The robotic legs wavered beneath her, struggling to support her weight. She could feel herself losing balance, and in that instant, she knew she couldn't stay standing much longer. But just as she was about to fall, Leo stepped forward, catching her before she hit the floor. His arms were strong, steady, and Ilara clung to him, her body shaking with exhaustion. Easy, Ilara, Leo said gently. You've done great. Just take it slow. This is just the beginning. We'll fix it. We'll adjust the settings. Ilara nodded, her head spinning. The feeling of standing, even for that brief moment, had been overwhelming. She had felt alive again, and that was enough to push through the fear. She had taken the first step. The real journey had only just begun. Okay, Ilara said, her voice determined. I'm ready to try again. Leo smiled, his eyes filled with admiration. That's the spirit. We'll get there, I promise. And with that, the first trial ended. But Ilara knew it wasn't the end of her journey. It was only the beginning. The following days were a whirlwind of adjustments. After the first trial, Ilara had been left physically exhausted, but emotionally, she felt a sense of determination stronger than ever before. Despite the overwhelming difficulty she experienced standing up, the brief moment of success was enough to fuel her resolve. She had stood. She had felt the movement beneath her, a sense of life returning to her limbs. It wasn't much, but it was a start. It was everything. Leo had been quick to analyze the results of the first trial, working tirelessly with his team to adjust the neural interface and fine-tune the robotic legs. They had made significant improvements, but they all agreed on one thing. Ilara had to take this journey one step at a time. The road ahead would be long, and the risks would always be present. But with each adjustment, the technology grew stronger, and so did Ilara's belief that she could walk again. Ilara found herself at the lab every day, her mind focused, her body ready for the next test. But each trial presented new challenges. It wasn't just about learning to walk again. It was about learning to trust the robotic legs, to listen to the subtle signals from her body, and to adapt to a new way of moving. Leo was always by her side, guiding her through the process with patience and care. He had become more than just the engineer who created the robotic legs. To Ilara, he had become a partner in her journey, someone she could rely on when the doubts crept in. One afternoon, as they prepared for another trial, Ilara looked at the mirror in the corner of the lab. She was wearing the robotic legs, and for the first time, she saw herself standing tall in the reflection. It was hard to believe. The woman in the mirror seemed almost like a stranger. She didn't look like the person who had spent so many years bound to a wheelchair. She didn't feel like the person who had given up hope of ever walking again. But she was that woman. She was the one who had dreamed of walking. And she was ready to try again. Leo stood beside her, his eyes soft with encouragement. You've come a long way, Ilara. You've made progress. Ilara nodded, her resolve hardening. I haven't given up yet, and I won't. They made their way to the testing area, where the robotic legs had been adjusted again. This time, the settings were more refined. The movements should be smoother, more natural. But Ilara knew better than to expect perfection. She couldn't afford to rush this process. She had to take it one step at a time. Literally. As the countdown to the trial began, Ilara felt her pulse quicken. Her mind was focused, her body tense with anticipation. She was ready. She had to be. All right, Ilara. Leo's voice broke through the silence, calm and steady. This is going to be the next big step. Remember, you don't have to force anything. Just let your mind guide the movements. Ilara closed her eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath. She could hear the soft hum of the machines around her, the quiet beeping of the monitors. Everything seemed to fall away, and for a moment, it felt like she was the only person in the world. Her thoughts turned inward, to the connection between her mind and the robotic legs. She concentrated on her goal, Visualizing herself walking, she thought about the fluid motion, about how it should feel to place one foot in front of the other. When the signal was given, Ilara took her first step. It was slow at first, uncertain, but it was a step, a real step. The robotic legs adjusted to her movement, and for the first time, she felt the sensation of walking again. Her body trembled with the effort, but there was no pain. She felt the ground beneath her feet. It was overwhelming. With Leo's encouragement, she moved forward. One step, then another. It wasn't graceful, it wasn't perfect, but it was progress. She was walking. The first few steps were shaky, but each movement grew more natural. With every step, Ilara's confidence grew. She could feel the robotic legs adjusting, learning her body's movements, responding faster and more precisely. The connection between her mind and the legs became smoother, more intuitive. But the trial wasn't over. Ilara had to walk a little further, navigate through a series of obstacles designed to test her balance and coordination. She took another deep breath and moved forward, slowly at first, then with more purpose. But then, as she made her way past the final obstacle, something unexpected happened. One of her legs stumbled, and she felt the familiar sensation of losing her balance. For a moment, panic surged within her. Her mind raced. She had come so far. She couldn't fall now. But Leo was there, just as he had been before. He reached out and steadied her, his hand strong on her arm. "Don't worry, Ilara," he said, his voice calm. "It's just a misstep. You're doing great." Ilara exhaled, feeling a sense of relief wash over her. "I can do this," she whispered to herself. With Leo's guidance, Ilara righted herself and took another step. And then another. Slowly, carefully, she completed the obstacle course. When she finished, she stopped, her breath heavy, her body trembling from the effort. But there was a smile on her face, an exhausted, triumphant smile. "You did it," Leo said, his voice filled with pride. "You walked." Ilara looked down at the robotic legs, the very legs that had given her a second chance. She had done it. She had taken the next step toward freedom. "I couldn't have done it without you," she said, her voice full of gratitude. Leo smiled warmly. "We did this together." For the first time in years, Ilara didn't feel like the woman trapped in a wheelchair. She felt like someone who had taken back control of her life. Someone who was no longer bound by her limitations. The path ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time, she could see the future. And it was a future where she could walk again. Weeks had passed since Ilara's first successful trial with the robotic legs. Every day, she returned to the lab, her body stronger, more accustomed to the new technology. Yet even as she progressed, there was a lingering sense of uncertainty. The journey was far from easy. Each movement required her focus, and each step demanded more effort than she could have imagined. But the more she practiced, the more natural it became. The robotic legs seemed to be an extension of her own body, adapting to her thoughts and intentions with increasing precision. Leo continued to stand by her side, offering support and encouragement. He had become more than just the engineer who had created the robotic legs. To Ilara, he was a symbol of hope, of someone who believed in her even when she doubted herself. His calm demeanor and quiet confidence were the foundation she needed to keep going. Ilara's body was growing stronger, but it was the mental battle that remained the hardest. The doubts never truly left her. She questioned if she was pushing herself too hard, if her body would ever truly accept the robotic legs, or if the technology would fail her when she needed it most. Each time she stumbled or lost her balance, a wave of frustration washed over her. But then Leo would remind her that every failure was a step closer to success. One day, as Ilara was practicing in the testing area, something felt different. She had been walking for hours, her muscles fatigued but still functional. The robotic legs had been responding well, almost too well. They were moving with grace, the movements becoming more fluid with each step. It was as if the technology was learning her rhythm, sensing perfectly with her body's natural flow. Leo watched from the sidelines, his eyes carefully studying her every movement. "You're doing great, Ilara," he said, his voice full of admiration. Ilara nodded, sweat dripping down her forehead. She was exhausted, but she could feel the breakthrough coming. She had spent so many years confined to a wheelchair, but now, with the robotic legs, she was feeling something she hadn't felt in a long time. Freedom. The freedom to move, to walk, to feel the world beneath her feet. But then, as she continued walking, she realized something. The robotic legs felt too perfect, too easy. The smoothness of the motion was almost unsettling. Alara's mind raced as she tried to make sense of the sensation. Was this too good to be true? Could there be a hidden flaw in the system? Without warning, she stumbled. After the breakthrough in the lab, Alara's confidence soared. The robotic legs had adapted to her body in ways she hadn't anticipated, and for the first time in years, she felt the possibility of living without limitations. But the true test lay ahead, leaving the controlled environment of the lab and stepping into the real world. Would the legs hold up under the unpredictability of everyday life? Alara wasn't sure, but she was eager to find out. Leo, who had become not only her guide but also her closest ally, had been cautiously optimistic. The real world will be different, he warned. You've been training in a controlled environment, Alara. Outside, there are obstacles, uneven terrain, and distractions. This will be a challenge. But Alara wasn't going to let fear hold her back. I've faced worse challenges, she replied, her voice determined. I've spent 10 years in a wheelchair. I can face anything now. They decided that her first real-world trial would be a visit to a nearby park. It was a quiet place, but it still held enough obstacles to simulate the unpredictable environment she would eventually have to navigate. There were curbs, uneven sidewalks, and trees that jutted out into the path. If she could handle this, she could handle anything. Alara stood by the entrance of the park, taking in the wide open space ahead of her. The sun shone down, casting long shadows on the grass. It felt like a dream. This was the world she had been watching from the confines of her wheelchair. Now she was standing on her own 2 feet, ready to step forward. Leo adjusted the settings on the robotic legs one last time. Just take it slow, Alara. Focus on each step. Trust yourself and the technology. Remember, we're learning as we go. She nodded, breathing deeply, trying to steady her nerves. The familiar weight of the robotic legs felt different in the open space. There was no sterile lab environment here. This was the real world. The sounds of birds chirping, distant laughter, and the rustling of leaves filled the air. It was a stark contrast to the hum of machines in the lab. Taking her first step onto the path felt both surreal and liberating. The ground beneath her feet was solid, and the robotic legs responded instantly to her movements. She focused on keeping her balance as she moved forward, placing one foot in front of the other, each step more fluid than the last. For the first few moments, everything went smoothly. The robotic legs seemed to glide across the pavement, responding to her thoughts and movements with ease. It was everything she had hoped for, and more. But then, as she approached a tree that stretched low over the path, Alara's confidence was tested. The branches hummed just high enough to obstruct her path. She would have to duck or maneuver carefully to avoid getting caught. She leaned forward slightly, preparing to step beneath the low branches. But just as she did, one of her legs stumbled. The ground was uneven under the grass, and the robotic leg didn't react as quickly as Alara needed. Her body wobbled, and for a split second, she felt like she was falling. Her heart raced, her mind screamed to regain balance. This was the moment, the first real test of the robotic legs in the unpredictable world outside. Could they save her? But then, just as she was about to lose her footing, the legs adjusted automatically. The sensors in the robotic joints detected her imbalance and compensated, shifting the weight and stabilizing her. With a sharp intake of breath, Alara found her footing again. The brief moment of panic subsided, and she straightened herself, grateful for the response. Leo's voice came through her earpiece, calm but encouraging. "Great job, Alara. Keep going. You got this." Alara nodded to herself, her breath steadying. She could feel her pulse in her ears, the adrenaline of the near fall still fresh, but she wasn't about to let fear take over. She was too close to success now. She had come too far. She continued forward, maneuvering past the tree and onto a stretch of sidewalk with a slight incline. This time, the challenge was the slope. The incline would test the strength of the robotic legs, as well as her ability to handle the added pressure. As she stepped up, her legs adapted, responding with the added torque needed to navigate the slope. The transition from flat ground to incline was smooth, though not without effort. She felt the muscles in her body strain as the robotic legs provided support, but it wasn't unbearable. It was like learning to walk all over again, and each new step was a victory. She reached the top of the incline and paused, looking back at the path she had traveled. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. She had successfully navigated her first real-world challenge. Then, as she moved toward the park's central fountain, something unexpected happened. A child on a bicycle came speeding down the path toward her, unaware of her presence. The child swerved at the last second, narrowly avoiding Ilara, but the quick motion startled her. She stumbled backward, and the robotic legs struggled to adjust in time. For a moment, Ilara felt the panic rise. Would the legs fail her? Would she fall in front of everyone? But just like before, the robotic legs reacted instantly. They shifted to stabilize her, compensating for the sudden movement. Ilara regained her balance, her pulse racing from the close call. She breathed deeply, calming herself. The technology had held up. The child, oblivious to the near miss, pedaled away, leaving Ilara standing there, still recovering from the shock. She looked at Leo, who had been watching from a distance. He gave her a thumbs up. "You're doing great," he called out. "That's exactly why we practice. Ilara, life's unpredictable, but you're handling it." Ilara's heart swelled with gratitude. She had faced the world outside, and she had survived. The robotic legs had passed the test, but more importantly, she had passed the test. She wasn't just walking now. She was living. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow across the park, Ilara took one final look at the world around her. She had fought to get here, and now she was free. The journey wasn't over. There would be more tests, more challenges. But for the first time in years, Ilara felt a sense of peace. She had regained control of her life, and with each step, she was getting closer to the future she had always dreamed of. Ilara stood at the edge of the park, staring out at the horizon, where the sun was setting in a brilliant display of oranges and purples. The robotic legs had already taken her farther than she had ever imagined. The world now felt within reach, and for the first time in over a decade, she felt like she was truly a part of it. No longer bound by the limitations of her wheelchair, she had stepped into a future that was once nothing more than a dream. Leo stood beside her, watching her closely. He had been there for every step of the journey, from the first trial with the robotic legs to the real-world tests. Now, as the evening light bathed the park in a soft glow, he could see the transformation in her. She wasn't just walking anymore. She was living again. "You did it, Ilara," Leo said, his voice filled with admiration. "You've come a long way." Ilara smiled, but there was something more in her expression now. Determination. "This is just the beginning, Leo. There's still so much more I want to do. I want to push the boundaries. I want to help others like me." Leo nodded. "I knew that about you from the start. But remember, it's not just about the technology. It's about what you can do with it. And you're going to change lives." For the first time since her accident, Ilara wasn't just thinking about herself. The robotic legs had given her more than just the ability to walk. They had given her a sense of purpose. She could now imagine a future where she didn't have to sit on the sidelines, waiting for things to change. She could be a part of the change. But there were still obstacles to overcome. As advanced as the technology was, it wasn't perfect. There were still risks, still uncertainties. And there were still people who didn't fully understand the potential of the technology. The world was not always ready for such innovation. Ilara knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy. She would have to fight for acceptance, for understanding, and for the opportunity to use her new abilities to help others. But for the first time, she felt ready. The fear of failure that had once held her back was gone. She had taken the first step, and now nothing could stop her. "Where do we go from here?" Ilara asked, turning to Leo, her voice filled with both curiosity and excitement. Leo looked out at the horizon, his eyes narrowing thoughtfully. "The future's wide open. We take what we've learned, and we push forward. There are millions of people who could benefit from this technology, Ilara. People who think they have no hope left. You could show them that there is hope." Ilara's heart swelled with resolve. She was no longer just a woman who had spent 10 years in a wheelchair. She was someone who could change the world, and that was a power she would use wisely. But before she could respond, a figure appeared in the distance. It was a man, dressed in a suit, walking briskly toward them. His face was unfamiliar, but there was something about his presence that made Ilara uneasy. She could tell he was important, someone who had come with a purpose. As he reached them, he introduced himself. "Ilara, I'm Dr. Kane. I've heard about your work with the robotic legs, and I have an offer for you. We're looking for someone to partner with us in advancing this technology even further. Your expertise, your experience, it could make all the difference." Ilara raised an eyebrow, intrigued but cautious. I'm listening. Dr. Kane smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. We've been tracking your progress. Ilara, we see the potential in your work, and we want you to be part of something bigger, something that could change the course of history. For a moment, Ilara was silent, considering his words. She had always dreamed of a future where technology could help people like her, people who had been overlooked, ignored, or dismissed. But this man, he was offering more than just a partnership. There was something about his offer that didn't feel entirely right. Leo, sensing her hesitation, stepped forward. What exactly do you want from her, Dr. Kane? Dr. Kane's smile faltered, but he quickly regained his composure. We want to help you, Ilara. We have the resources, the funding, and the technology to take this to the next level. Together, we could revolutionize the field of robotics and change lives on a global scale. Ilara felt the weight of his words. This was the opportunity she had been waiting for, the chance to make a real difference. But something in her gut told her that this was not just about helping others. There was more at play here, something that felt off. Why me? Ilara asked, her voice steady but cautious. Why offer this to me, and not to someone else? Dr. Kane paused, clearly caught off guard by the question. Because you've proven yourself, Ilara. You've shown the world what's possible. You're the key to making this technology a reality for everyone. Together, we can change the future. The words hung in the air, heavy with possibility. Ilara looked at Leo, her closest ally in this journey, and saw the uncertainty in his eyes. He hadn't spoken much since Dr. Kane's arrival, but his expression said it all. He didn't trust this man. Ilara felt the pull of ambition, the desire to help as many people as possible, but at the same time, she couldn't ignore the warning bells ringing in her mind. She had come this far, and she wasn't about to let anyone, no matter how persuasive, control her future. I appreciate the offer, Dr. Kane, Ilara said, her voice firm. But I'm not ready to make any decisions just yet. I need time to think. Dr. Kane's smile faltered for a moment, but he quickly masked it. Of course, Ilara, take all the time you need. We'll be in touch. As Dr. Kane walked away, Ilara turned to Leo. What do you think? Leo didn't hesitate. I think we need to be careful. There's something about him that doesn't sit right with me. Ilara nodded, her instincts telling her the same thing. She wasn't about to rush into anything without understanding the full picture. With the evening sun now dipping below the horizon, Ilara and Leo stood together, ready for whatever came next. The future was full of uncertainty, but it was also full of promise. And whatever path she chose, Ilara knew one thing for certain. She would never stop moving forward.